Dr. Hoffer always recommended that when you do a talk, you should start with a case history or two. And this is a beaut. Many years ago, I had a client who was a woman suffering pretty much everything, doing pretty much everything wrong. She was in her 20s, she was HIV positive, heavy drinker, drug user, smoker, lousy diet, stress, bad relationships. And she was in trouble. To her credit, she lowered her drug and alcohol use considerably, but she kept smoking. She ate a poor diet, stayed poor. She was under a lot of stress, stayed pretty stressful. I mean, being HIV positive would qualify as a stress in itself. She took multivitamins irregularly, but there's one thing she did really well. She took a lot of vitamin C regularly for 2 decades. Saw her later, 26 years later, unplanned, there she was. She said the doctors cannot find HIV in her body. And now they're saying she never had it. I'm here to tell you this lady was tested 6 ways from Tuesday, and she had HIV, and she had been in treatment, and over years they monitor it. I think she probably still has it somewhere. We all know that viruses are stubborn little stinkers, and they rarely are gone. But it can't be detected, and she has no symptoms. Now, that has got to be good. That's just plain interesting, at least interesting, and I think it's uplifting. Will Rogers put it well, you don't have to argue with people, just show them. Of course, he was from Oklahoma. Out in California, it was Robert Fulton Cathcart III, an orthopedic surgeon, who would end up treating AIDS patients with an astonishing amount of vitamin C, 200,000 milligrams a day. And doing that was so effective that word got around because Cathcart's patients were living longer, much longer than they're expected to, and they had very, very few, if any, symptoms. Whenever someone says vitamin C has no merit for the common cold, I like to point this out, that if it works against something like HIV, perhaps it could help with influenza. Now, this is the paramount paper on the subject of treating AIDS with vitamin C. Note the date. For those of you who are not from the United States, no doubt you are noticing a tremendous amount of media coverage over some rather trivial matters lately. This never happens in the United States at all. This is unusual. Normally, the airwaves are full of news about how you can treat HIV-positive people with high doses of C. Like Pinocchio, I think my nose will hit the microphone in a minute. I have another case history of sorts, and I'm very familiar with this one. Fortunately for me, Linus Pauling wrote Vitamin C, the Common Cold and the Flu in 1976, just in time for me. My son was born the following year. For that, I thank Dr. Pauling. And we followed his advice. People have criticized Linus Pauling, but I always tell my students that, the funny thing about Pauling's critics is that they seem to have 2 fewer Nobel Prizes than Linus did. Pauling actually said this. This is not a paraphrase. He said, every drug should have this label. Keep this medicine out of the reach of everyone. Use vitamin C instead. I think that's just marvelous, don't you? So I took it literally. I raised my children all the way into college. They never had a single dose of any antibiotic, not once, not ever. No antiviral, not once, not ever. Some people think I was lucky. I believe parenthood involves a certain amount of luck, but I think those of us that are parents can tell you that it's like Thomas Edison said, it's 95% perspiration. Of course, my children took their age in grams of vitamin C every day. That's quite a lot. 1-year-old child, 1,000 milligrams. 9-year-old child, 9,000 milligrams. That's what we did because Dr. Cathcart and Dr. Pauling seemed to know what they were talking about, and I couldn't find better sources than them. So my father used to say, if you really want to know something, go to the organ grinder, not the monkey. So there it is. By age 10, they're taking 10,000 milligrams of C a day. I'm not making this up, and neither were Dr. Pauling or Dr. Cathcart. They were getting it from Frederick Robert Klenner of Reidsville, North Carolina, a name that keeps coming up, and for good reason. We owe Dr. Klenner a lot. When my kids were sick, they followed Dr. Cathcart's advice, and they took oral vitamin C to saturation, which is indicated by bowel tolerance. Now, when I speak to students, when I speak to the public, I tell them that bowel tolerance means exactly what you think it means. When Abram Hoffer would have children as patients, he'd want them to improve their diet. If they had ADHD, they needed to. So the child would be sitting there, and Abram would lean over and say to the child, "No junk." Abram said every child knew exactly what he meant. Well, that was easy. Doctors say they only have 5 or 6 or 8 minutes for a visit. No junk, 2 words. Some jokes are so good you can't wait for the slide. Dr. Hoffer also said this, and I think it's a really good lesson for everyone who has a doctor, is a doctor, or knows a doctor, or is interested in just plain good medicine. Where are the good old days, said Abram, when honest physicians honestly reported what they saw in language that any doctor could understand? This idea is not new. Using high doses of vitamin C has been going on for decades, and it is probably the most unacknowledged successful research in medicine. Literally, decades of physicians' reports and controlled studies do support the use of very large doses of ascorbate. Effective doses are high doses, often 1,000 times the US RDA. Get out your calculator and run it by, because the RDA is under 100 milligrams, and that includes a smoker. You might say, well, that's standard. Well, so is minimum wage. You might get by on it, but just barely. And as a parent, I would say just try raising a family on it. Who in their right mind would want to get by with minimum wage, and who in their right mind would want to get by with 100 milligrams or less of vitamin C? Now, it is a cornerstone of medical science that dose affects treatment outcome. This is obvious to everyone who knows of, researches in, or sells for the pharmaceutical industry. Abram said to me once, you should write a paper on what happens if you treat a bacterial disease with 500 units of an antibiotic. Now, I used to milk cows many years ago, part of my sordid history that makes me such an engaging speaker. And I personally administered antibiotics to cows with mastitis. It was part of the job. At that time, we'd give them 1 million units, which is kind of a lot in 1978. Sometimes 2 million units. And sometimes those cows did not survive. No veterinarian would have said to me, well, since you only gave 500 units, that's okay. We always gave the right amount, and even that high amount didn't work. So with vitamins, how do we expect 500 milligrams of vitamin C in a study to have anything to do with acute hepatitis when we know from Dr. Cathcart's papers that it takes tens of thousands of milligrams and possibly over 100,000 milligrams a day. Most vitamin C research has used low doses, inadequate doses, and obviously these experiments are being set up to fail. Low doses do not get clinical results. That's all there is to it. Can I get some water? Now let's talk about the tolerable upper intake, or UL. For vitamin C, it is a somewhat funny 2,000 milligrams a day. And what's really interesting is how quickly that tolerable upper intake is sort of converted in the minds of the public into upper limit. Now this level is set by the Food and Nutrition Board at the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies. The National Academies used to be called the National Academy of Sciences. I bet you've been to a lot of conferences and nobody ever used the phrase oxymoronic laughter before. Investigators using vitamin C in high doses have consistently reported excellent results. You've been hearing from them today, you'll be hearing from them tonight, you'll be hearing from them tomorrow, you'll be hearing from them the next day, and you'll be hearing from them from now on, because the paper trail is not going to go away. And it hasn't gone away. It's just been ignored. We're talking 80 years now that vitamin C studies have been marginalized, if not vilified. High doses were, in fact, advocated right away. Signorgi, who is credited with having isolated ascorbic acid and would later receive a Nobel Prize for ascorbate-related work in 1937, talked about taking fairly large doses immediately, I think around 1,000 milligrams. Now here are some early pioneers of high-dose vitamin C therapy. We know Dr. Klenner pretty well, but the other two are interesting and deserve special attention. And then we have two modern champions. I think we both recognize those names too. Let's go back to Claus Washington Jungeblut, a physician who was professor of bacteriology. He was full professor, by the way, at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York. Good school. He was a well-known and acknowledged pioneer in the field of polio therapy, and he advocated vitamin C as an antiviral and an antitoxin. When you take a look at Jungblut's work, it gets interesting real fast. He saw vitamin C as an antiviral. He saw vitamin C as prevention and also a treatment for polio, and he published on this in 1935. And there is that seminal paper. That has pretty much been ignored. I had a student at a university who came up to me and said, "This is very interesting. I'd like to do a paper on vitamin C and polio and tease out all of Jungblut's work and any related work." And I said to her, "Well, you know, you're going to get some opposition in the department for this, so you better do a good job." I said, I think you can probably find around 15 good papers, and you should be able to make an interesting case for it. Well, she did a real good job, and the department chairman said to me once, he described this student as a dial tone, literally, because she had lighted on this particular topic. A remarkably narrow-minded, unscientific, and I think politically incorrect way to describe any student who is looking at literature and thinking for themselves. And this is what you find if you look for Jungeblut. All of this before Pearl Harbor. What's especially noteworthy here is that at this time we had a president in the United States who had polio. You would think that somebody would have connected the dots. Time magazine did a study on September 18, 1939, reporting that Jungeblut studied the 1938 Australian polio epidemic and said that low vitamin C status was associated with the disease. Fast forward to a wonderful physician, a Greek physician living in Australia, Archie Kournikos, remember him? And his wonderful book, Every Second Child. Vitamin C has never caused polio, unlike the live oral vaccine, which has. Now, I'm very happy that Dr. Sabin invented the oral vaccine, because when I was a little boy, they marched me down the hall of the nurse's office for polio vaccination. I was terrified they were going to stick that darn needle in me. And we got there, and they gave me a sugar cube. And I thought, this is to keep me quiet while they stabbed me with the needle. But they let me go. Eat this. And I left. So Dr. Sabin, I have no argument with him as a compassionate doctor. But the fact of the matter is that the oral polio vaccine, according to certain authorities, one of them, Dr. Jonas Salk, remember him? Dr. Salk said that since 1960, the oral polio vaccine was the sole cause of polio in the United States. Salk and Sabin did not get along. Whatever happened to vitamin C therapy for polio? What happened? What happened to Dr. Jungeblut? Why didn't anybody follow this up? Jungeblut actually used very low doses. Sabin went in there and replicated it. But he used even lower doses. Now, I've told many an undergraduate that that does not constitute a replication. If I have to pay, say, $80,000 for, say, a sports car, and you go and you get that same sports car for $7,000, something is wrong. Either I overpaid or you're buying a hot vehicle. So we're not really replicating. The circumstances are not the same. And yet Sabin's work has been taken as basically the benchmark, very quietly, insidiously, in fact. But even with the low doses he used with monkeys, Jungeblut made the correct conclusion, and here it is. Remember, this is before 1940. So here's some of those references, which are, of course, on your copy of the presentation. 22 of Jungeblut's research reports were published in the Journal of Experimental Medicine, and I'm happy to say you can get that access online free of charge, full text. Very interesting reading. I put together a biography and a bibliography of Dr. Jungeblut, and here are the links for that. The Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine published that some years ago. Now we have Dr. William J. McCormick, Toronto, Canada, practicing physician, and he would use vitamin C as antiviral and antibiotic. And he also was one of the very first to point out that ascorbate deficit causes cardiovascular disease. He gave injections of gram-sized doses, around 1,000 milligrams, maybe just a little more. At the time, a lot. 60 years ago or more, McCormick saw that vitamin C deficiency was, in fact, the essential cause of and effective cure for numerous communicable diseases. He's one of the very first to advocate injections. And there's one of his papers in Medical Record in 1947. This is right about the time the sound barrier was first broken. McCormick boldly stated, and correctly, that vitamin C does not cause kidney stone. In fact, McCormick treated kidney stones with vitamin C in 1946. I consider the kidney stone caused by vitamin C to be the Loch Ness monster of medicine. Everyone knows what it is, but no one's been able to bring one in yet. Very similar comment to Dr. Jungeblut. Vitamin C is a specific antagonist of chemical and bacterial toxins. McCormick also was interested in the fact that 4 out of 5 coronary cases in hospital, in his experience, showed vitamin C deficiency. Vitamin C, of course, is going to strengthen collagen. Blood vessels contain collagen. Without enough vitamin C, these blood vessels get weak, said Dr. McCormick, and the artery can literally bleed into itself. Naturally, the body can't have that, forms a clot, and a clot on the inside of an artery is not a particularly good idea. Vitamin C strengthens the arterial wall, preventing this process from beginning. McCormick also found, when doctors were still advertising cigarettes, and this is an exact quote, in clinical and laboratory research, he found that the smoking, quote, of one cigarette neutralizes in the body approximately 25 milligrams of ascorbic acid, end quote. And that's how cigarettes are involved in causing cardiovascular disease. One of the ways is that it weakens the collagen, and you can't afford to have weak collagen in your blood vessels. 3 decades later, Linus Pauling and Matthias Rath would go on to demonstrate how vitamin C was actually a solution to cardiovascular disease. Here are 2 of their papers, both from the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine, 1991 and 1992. A review of Dr. McCormick's life and work and his bibliography is at this link here. Then there's Dr. Klenner. In North Carolina, Reidsville, North Carolina, small town. Although he was in general practice, Klenner was in fact a board-certified chest physician. He was a graduate of the Duke University School of Medicine. And vitamin C was used by Dr. Klenner as an antibiotic, an antiviral, and an antitoxin. And he was pretty much the first to give really high doses, really large injections of vitamin C. And there's the number. Klenner treated patients with injections of vitamin C ranging from approximately 350 to 1,200 milligrams of vitamin C per kilogram per body weight per day. Working that out to the average adult, it's somewhere between 20 and 35,000 milligrams a day for the lower amount. And a very Robert Cathcart-like 70 to 120,000 milligrams a day for an adult. Klenner was successful. He treated polio, pneumonia, and other serious infectious diseases, and was largely ignored. He also showed up just what a big public relations problem vitamin C has. It's too good for too many things. There's some of the things. A critic can look at that and say, oh, wait a minute. And yet we know in the human body that there's really not that many nutrients and there's a whole lot of chemical reactions. And it's common for a vitamin, or a coenzyme like a vitamin, to be involved in dozens or even hundreds of things. That's the way the body works. So I would suggest that the reason one vitamin can seem to cure so many things is because a deficiency of one vitamin can cause so many things. Interestingly, Klenner also could stop and even reverse multiple sclerosis. This protocol, which was published by the Townsend Letter with their kind permission, is available at dryourself.com and also at the Townsend website here. This is a lengthy and detailed plan where Klenner sets out all the vitamins he used and the amounts he used. And if you remember Dr. Lyndon Smith, who is nationally known as the children's doctor, he actually won Emmy Awards, something that Linus Pauling didn't even manage. Smith was on The Tonight Show 60 times or something like that. Popular man in his day. Dr. Klenner's work was summarized by Lyndon Smith in Clinical Guide to the Use of Vitamin C. That is a free text paper you can find on the internet with a simple search for it. This is one location. My review of Klenner's life and a list of his publications is at dryourself.com and at the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine website. Dr. Cathcart, mentioned him already. Cathcart had been doing this for a long time, starting in the 1960s, and he got spectacular results using very high doses of vitamin C. When Cathcart was asked how much to give, he also did not answer, but he gave estimates, and one of the ways he would describe illness was by the amount of vitamin C it took to cure it. So he would talk of the 100,000 milligram cold. That was his way of terming it. Makes a lot of sense. Take a minute to read this one over. I've been consulted by many researchers, said Cathcart, who proposed bold studies of the effects of massive doses of ascorbate. Every time the university center, the ethics committee, the pharmacy committee, or whatever, deny permission for the use of massive doses of ascorbate and render the study almost useless. Seasoned researchers, depending upon government grants, do not even try to study adequate doses. One of the most amusing aspects of this research are the speculations and research into the toxicity and other adverse reactions of tiny doses of ascorbate, when many have used for years 20 to 100 times the amount being discussed. If there's one paper you want to read by Dr. Cathcart, this is it, in Medical Hypotheses in 1981, vitamin C, titration to bowel tolerance, etc. And here's two more. Note the dates, 1984, 1985. Have you ever seen a newspaper article about Dr. Cathcart? There's a list of his publications. He didn't publish a lot. That's why his papers are so especially important. And then we have Dr. Riordan, our beloved author of Medical Mavericks, volumes 1 through 3. And you're here because you obviously know that Dr. Riordan and his colleagues have and continue to offer tremendous leadership to the world on the use of IVC and other modalities. And this conference gives you an idea to look around and see that firsthand. This is my first visit to the clinic, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be with you today. Since 2008 at least, the National Institutes of Health has even shown some interest in high-dose vitamin C as chemotherapy against cancer. But it was 62 years ago that Dr. William J. McCormick noted that persons with cancer are vitamin C deficient, and he actually measured it. They needed about 4,500 milligrams to get to neutral, to bring them up to just past scurvy. Interesting that it was published in the Archives of Pediatrics. I have a feeling that paper was hard to get published at all. And if you look at what's printed today, you might come to the conclusion that this is promising, but quite unproven. My father's favorite old-time expression was, "We get too soon old and too late smart." So the medical literature has ignored 8 decades of high-dose vitamin C work. Tens of thousands of milligrams of vitamin C is perhaps the most unacknowledged successful research in medicine. But it's time to be forward-looking. Just because it was ignored doesn't mean it's going to be ignored anymore. And every time you put forward a paper, a comment, a letter, treat a patient, do research, whatever it is you're doing, you are bringing forward an idea whose time had come a long time ago. And we're here, right now, with that opportunity right in front of us. Each person in this room, each person that you talk to. There are those who would question the sanity of people who use high doses of vitamin C and advocate it for so many different things in such huge doses. But as Oliver Stone, famous film director, said, all of that is just to stop you from having the discussion at all. It's much more fun to hear what someone has to say. The U.S. Army put it in brief terms. And there are other ways of saying it. In Toronto some years ago, the conference, the Nutritional Medicine Today conference, was just wrapping up. Everybody was standing up, putting on their coats, and Dr. Riordan came up and said to Stephen Carter at the podium that he'd like to say something. And Stephen Carter said, would everybody please just hang on a minute and sit down? Dr. Riordan has something to say. And Hugh got there, and I had just met Hugh at that point. And he was a very dignified and imposing-looking person on a podium. And he got up there looking like the very epitome of scholarship. And he bent over the microphone, and he said, the room went wild. Most of us are already familiar with the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine. The archive is almost entirely online. It's free access and searchable. And you may not know about the Orthomolecular Medicine News Service. Hugh and I talked about this many years ago. Hugh wanted to make orthomolecular household word. That's the very phrase he used with me. And he liked the idea of having a news service to put forward the positive approach to healing using nutrition, high doses of nutrients, and orthomolecular medicine in general. So the Orthomolecular Medicine News Service was founded, 13 years ago or so. It's non-commercial, it's peer-reviewed, and subscriptions are free. You can go to my website, dryourself.com, or you can go to orthomolecular.org and sign up for this press release feed. We've done about 200 of these releases over the years. The archive is posted and also free, and I'd like to point out that as editor of the publication, I welcome submissions. If you have something you'd like to write about, I'd like to read it. So if you have an idea, if you have something that you've experienced in your practice or research that you've done or something that you found in your own personal life, we publish reviews, editorials, commentaries on the news. Maybe you've seen something on the news and you'd like to make a rebuttal to it. This is the type of thing that we also publish. You can contact me through my website, which is dryourself.com. If you come to see the movie tonight, you're going to get more of me than you can stand, I expect. The movie is called That Vitamin Movie, and it's just an awful lot of fun. It's the world's first feature film about high-dose vitamin therapy. And the beauty of it is we've got 20 experts in it, and many of those experts are at this conference, so you get to see them on the screen, point to them and go, ha, 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 ha. It's a lot of fun, so if you haven't signed up for that, we'll have a panel discussion at the end. Over 1 million views of That Vitamin Movie so far. We have time for a question or two?
How long have you been doing Doctor Yourself now?
The Doctor Yourself website has been up since 1999. Doctor Yourself is designed for the layperson. It's searchable, it's peer-reviewed, it's non-commercial, except it does list my books, but it doesn't sell them. It's been very well received. We've gotten a lot of attention over the years, and I'm delighted to say that it has made the list of Quackwatch's non-recommended websites. Now, if you're coming to the awards banquet on Saturday night, Dr. Ron has unwisely asked me to MC this. And I have a little follow-up on some comments about Dr. Barrett, which are absolutely pleasant and suitable for publication.
So do you have to consider fluid intake when you take really high doses of oral C? And you might mention how much vitamin C you're taking and how you do that.
Yes, it's an excellent question. The short answer is no, although you should be having plenty of fluid anyway, unless your doctor told you why you should not. Dr. Ralph Bookman, who was Ronald Reagan's personal physician, said you should have 10 glasses of liquid a day. Bookman actually said you should make a fetish of it. So most of us suffer from not having enough water in general. If you're taking so much vitamin C that you are getting diarrhea, you're doing it wrong. Bowel tolerance is indicated by what Linus Pauling specifically called loose stool. Diarrhea is not it. Diarrhea is not what we want. That's a sign of way too much. Loose stool is a safe indicator, in a constipated nation, perhaps even a beneficial indicator, that someone's getting enough vitamin C. It is indicated by gas, flatulence, a rumble in the tummy, a gurgle. That's usually close enough. I've done this with enough children to know that even kids can learn when they've had enough. It's always fun to mention this, but the first time I ever used bowel tolerance was when my daughter was sick. She was 4 years old. She'd been coughing a blue streak, and it was just awful. She'd coughed all night, and we were ready to go into the pediatrician, whom we had never met at that point. And I thought to myself, well, before we go and subject this child to the stress of going to the doctor and driving and sitting in the waiting room and coughing all over and being frightened perhaps by the experience because she'd never been to the pediatrician, because she'd never needed to go, we would have taken her. She just didn't need to go. What happened was I thought, well, Dr. Cathcart knows something, so I'll do what he said. And I gave her bowel tolerance levels of vitamin C, which was basically about 4,000 milligrams every 30 or 40 minutes. And she was 4.5. And right at the time she had to go sit on the toilet, the cough was gone. It was really quite dramatic. So diarrhea, which would be a lot of fluid loss, is a sign that you're doing it wrong. You don't want diarrhea. Loose stool is loose stool. It is not that explosive toilet-shattering catastrophe of diarrhea.
So they were asking what form of vitamin C, I guess ascorbic acid, sodium ascorbate, ester C, which ones do you favor, or mostly?
Well, there's several ways to answer that. If it's a matter of money, take the cheapest form and take a lot of it and divide the dose. Example, you go to a supermarket now, you might pay 50 cents or even $1 for an orange. You might possibly have the RDA of vitamin C in that orange, but I doubt it. I would say it's more like 60 milligrams or even 40. That's 50 cents or $1. You go to a big box discount store, and right now you could easily get 500 capsules of 1,000 milligrams C for $10 or $11. Linus Pauling said, use ascorbic acid crystals. Linus Pauling said, vitamin C is ascorbic acid is vitamin C. Pauling recommended using crystals to avoid excipients in the tablets. There are fewer excipients in a capsule than in a hard tablet because to make a hard tablet, you have to have something to hold that together. So a capsule has fewer excipients and powder has none. Curiously enough, ascorbic acid powder, if it's kept dry and sealed, has the longest shelf life of any form of vitamin C. It lasts longer as ascorbic acid dry than it does in food. So if it's a matter of cost, I tell people, get the cheap stuff and take a lot. But for certain conditions, you're better off with certain things. Let's say someone needed a huge amount of vitamin C and they're very sick and they didn't want to take a lot. Let's say someone was in a hospital or a nursing home, or they couldn't eat, or they had cancer. You give them the IV because obviously they don't have to go to all that trouble. And there's no bowel tolerance indicator if they have it that way. Then there's liposomal vitamin C. There are the other forms, or the buffered forms. They all have their role. I think it's a matter of taking what works. You take enough C to be symptom-free, whatever the amount might be. I would put that, a little tattoo on the back of your arm. Take enough C to be symptom-free, whatever the amount might be. I don't care what kind. I care that you're well. Take enough to be well, you're done.
Do you spread your dosing out so many times a day?
Yes. Except when I made that vitamin movie. You're going to like this because I'm going to give you the inside story, the behind-the-scenes skinny on what really happened. There's a scene where I take 16 or 17,000 milligrams of vitamin C at once. Now, I was told by people, that's irresponsible, you really shouldn't do that. sending the wrong message, it's too much. Obviously, I was making a point, but what also happened there, that was actually the second take.
So to speak.
Yeah.
The second take.
Now, here's another megadose one for you. Many years ago, when I was first learning about Dr. Cathcart, and my daughter was only 5, the next door neighbor's little boy was 5 or 6, and the mother came over and said to me, "My son just gulped down about 2/3 of a whole bottle of vitamin C chewables." And she was concerned. And I said, "Oh my. Does he have any symptoms?" And she said, "Well, his asthma went away." Dr. Klenner said vitamin C is the safest substance available to the physician. Dr. Klenner said the doctors should give vitamin C while pondering the diagnosis. That's all you need to know.
I can add a story to that. I did sit in with Dr. Riordan my first time when he invited me down to just shadow him. And at that time in my life, I had horrible mouth sores. These were not just little canker sores. They were huge herpetic sores. And they were painful. And I think I was having them that day. And he was telling several patients that high-dose vitamin C would control pain. And so I heard that. You know, you can cognitively hear something. And I thought, well, so I got back. I was an hour and a half drive back to Salina, and an hour and a half north of here. And I stopped at a drugstore and picked up vitamin C capsules, 500 milligrams. And I poured out 8 of them, which would be 4,000 milligrams. Now, keep in mind, physicians are taught that drugs are dangerous, and large doses of anything are dangerous. And so I looked at that. I knew Dr. Riordan I trusted him. I saw him prescribe it to a number of people. It was there in the store. I looked at those 8 capsules, and I thought to myself, I hope I don't die, and I took them. And I didn't. But I tell that story to let people know that when you approach a physician who has no experience, and it's hard to believe, but there are physicians who live in pretty sheltered lives as far as nutritional therapies, that to them is a scary dose. And so we're in a room here where everyone knows about high-dose vitamin C, but when you're talking with your patient, you kind of have to begin to try to understand it from their perspective, and sometimes going up slowly is not a bad idea.
And the point should be finished with this comment to answer the question completely. Dividing the dose is absolutely essential. It's called Dynamic Flow by Dr. Steve Hickey and Dr. Hillary Roberts. And if you have vitamin C in very, very, very frequent doses, oral doses are remarkably effective. My story to counter Ron's, anything you can quote, I can quote another
Better.
one. We also went into the Orthomolecular Hall of Fame at the same banquet, and Ron's still upset that he didn't go in first. At any rate, when we're talking about dividing the dose, I had viral pneumonia a number of years ago, and it was really pretty serious. I had a friend who was an internist, and he said, "You have viral pneumonia, both lungs, you're very sick, here's an antibiotic." And I said, he said, "No, that's for the secondary infection. We can't do anything about the virus, but this is for anything that might be bacterial. Go home, stay in bed, here's some codeine cough medicine, just have good care at home." Well, all right. So I decided I had to do something, so while playing Scrabble with my wife one day, I figured Dr. Cathcart worked for my daughter, maybe it'll work for me. So I took 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C every 6 minutes during a Scrabble game. What's that, 20,000 milligrams an hour? After 3 hours, or 60,000 milligrams, my cough stopped, and my fever came down to 3 degrees in 3 hours. And I thought, wow, I've discovered something great and true and new. And then I read Dr. Cathcart more, and then I read Dr. Klenner, who was ahead of him by 20 years, and they had done exactly the same thing. And when I read Dr. Klenner now, it's just like what I and you have been told and what I and you have already seen. Anything that stands the test of time, it's worth keeping in mind. So divide that dose. Water-soluble vitamins in general, you divide the dose. Vitamin C in particular. You do the best you can When you're sick, I think you should literally take it constantly.
This is an interesting question that I think a patient would probably ask, having heard this. They would say, can you take vitamin C to bowel tolerance to treat diarrhea?
If the diarrhea is caused by a virus, yes.
Yeah.
So paradoxically, if someone has the stomach flu or whatever it is, if they take more C, it will go away. The simple test here, of course, is to try it and see. If you take more vitamin C and it goes away, then you're all set. Now, if you take more vitamin C and for any reason it gets worse, knock it off. It was many years ago that Dr. Richard Passwater, in one of the first real health zinger books I ever read back in the 70s, Super Nutrition, that's it. Dick Passwater said, one way to determine your vitamin level is to take some vitamins, see if you feel better, raise the dose, see if you feel better still, raise the dose, see if you still feel better, and if you don't, or if you feel worse, go back to the dose that got you the most results, and there you are. Now that sounds too simple to work, of course, but isn't that a therapeutic trial? Isn't that what doctors do all the time with drugs? Take some of these, they go to the sample bag, try some of these, tell me how you feel, adjust the dose later. Why don't we just do that with vitamins? And why don't we do that with 4-year-old kids? We have to break open that whole area. And that's why I love telling these stories, because it's being a parent and being a teacher, because I'm not a physician, I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher. I'm coming at this from the education side.
Another question about children. ADHD and the use of niacin and vitamin C together. Have you ever put those two together in use in children with cognitive problems?
Oh yeah, Dr. Abram Hoffer led the pack on that. He treated a lot of kids with ADHD, and in addition to getting them on a no-junk diet, he would also give them niacin, and sometimes he'd give niacinamide. Vitamin C reduces, but does not eliminate, the flush symptom in most, but not all, people. Niacinamide doesn't cause a flush at all. That's why it's in most multivitamins and B-complex vitamins, because manufacturers do not want you complaining or returning the product. So niacinamide does not cause the flush. Niacin does. Vitamin C moderates that flush somewhat. Vitamin C is also good for kids with ADHD because kids with ADHD probably are not getting a vitamin C anyway, because most kids aren't getting enough vitamin C. And we take the precautionary principle here, or to quote my father, will this help? His answer would be, can't wait. Taking vitamin C is just a really good idea, and it's difficult for us to get over this idea that somehow there's a trick in here, there's a catch in here someplace. This high-dose thing, it's just waiting where it's going to explode. But the American Association of Poison Control Centers monitors who dies from what every year in the United States. There's about 57 or 58 reporting poison control centers coast to coast. This is a big deal. This is the biggest online, on-time, real-time database of who dies from what. In the last 35 years, they've kept records. There have been 13 allegations that vitamins killed somebody. None of these are substantiated. And there's no deaths from vitamin C. There just aren't. Abram Hoffer, again, quoting him because he was so good to me and so good for all of us to learn from, Abram said flatly, no one dies from vitamins. And about the kidney stone thing, bear in mind, too, that vitamin C not only does not cause kidney stones, according to Dr. Emanuel Taraskin of the University of Alabama Medical School at Birmingham. Taraskin was a full professor. Taraskin said that vitamin C inhibits the bond between calcium and oxalate. So even though vitamin C causes you to excrete more oxalate, that's true, it also keeps it from binding with calcium, so you're not going to form a calcium oxalate stone.
This last question here is, I think it kind of points out what I think is the important take-home message is ask, how much vitamin C powder do you use for gut health? And if the questioner is asking how much do you use, that answer is going to be your answer, right?
Right, I take 18,000 milligrams of C a day in good health because that's what Linus Pauling took. And to use the joke twice, he has 2 more Nobels than I do. So it's not as funny the second time, is it? One thing people often bring up is that taking all that vitamin C is somehow going to mess with the ability of the body to maintain normal intestinal flora. And we need to take a step back there and just remind ourselves that vitamin C is a weak acid, and your stomach has a strong acid. You know anybody with bad case of reflux where they actually have that acid go up their throat? It hurts. It can even cause scarring. This is an acid that is at least 50 times stronger than ascorbic acid. So your body is designed to handle strong acids. So if people say to you, ascorbic acid is going to somehow harm your gut flora, that's not possible because your stomach acid would have already done that. And your stomach is set up to send down the material, and right as it enters into the small intestine, it's hit with that strong alkali, which neutralizes everything. So Linus Pauling pointed this out, and many others have as well, but it's worth restating. Vitamin C is a weak acid, and it's all but irrelevant in terms of how the bacteria flora go. How many people have ever been to a physician that always recommended that if you take an antibiotic, you also take yogurt or probiotic? How many people have heard their doctor, their own doctor, say that? I know you've probably said it to others, but how many people have heard that from their doctor? Yeah, there's only a small number of hands. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, my point was that vitamin C is a dynamic concept almost, in that normally in nature the vast majority of organisms make their own vitamin C, and it's an automatic adjustment. We humans have to rediscover vitamin C for ourselves and understand that our daily dose may vary from one day to the next depending upon stress, depending upon diet, sleep, a number of factors, and our patients are going to vary quite a bit. So getting that idea across to patients who are used to working in a pharmaceutical model is difficult. They want to know the dose for the condition. And I think Cathcart came the closest by letting people know that in worst case scenarios you need to probably do this much, but even those are going to vary with each person.
It varies from you day by day. It varies from you hour to hour. But taking enough C to be symptom-free is a good benchmark. And bowel tolerance, again, is not diarrhea. Bowel tolerance is a hint of the rumble, a hint of the loose stool. Pauling really had high regard for Cathcart, and I think this is one of the reasons. That's so elegant and so easy to manage right at home.
Let's give a hand to Dr. Saul for a really nice presentation.